Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. As always, every week when I'm around, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com, Andrew Malcolm joins us. I took 2 weeks off, man. So,
That's right. That's right. So you don't know that that Biden was charged with his influence peddling, yeah, and he announced he's not going to run. Yeah.
No. Now I am detecting a faint whiff of of an eight-letter barnyard epithet.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy.
Oh,
that
man.
was so funny. That was the Chicago 7 trial. And
was that this is Chicago 7? Well, that makes sense. This is
and they were so the Times editors were so prudish about it in those days. Now this is a long time ago, right? That's what 70?
1970? I mean,
yeah. So they were such prudes, and I'm not complaining because the culture at that time was that way. Now they're on meth, but so I would devise just in my own little mental games ways to get around their silly rules like that. One time I wrote a story, and I wrote a lot of features, and they were always cutting the last paragraph, which was a kicker, right? I mean, right. So one time I was about a sheriff in Stockton, California. I wrote the story, and then I added a completely meaningless paragraph at the end, and they cut it, so it ended the way I wanted.
My father tells a story from when he was in the Army that he learned that the first time you clean a weapon, your drill sergeant is never going to approve it. And so he cleaned his weapon. It was clean. He presented it. The drill sergeant said, "No, that's not," said something, threw it back at him. And so we didn't do anything with it, presented the same weapon afterwards, and it passed.
Yeah.
Similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there was that episode. So then this one, they were being such uptight about what he said, and I said, "Well, but it's disrupting the courtroom." And they said, "Well, we have that he's yelling." I said, "But no, he's yelling offensively." So so I figured out. I wrote that he constantly disrupting the courtroom by jumping up and down, knocking chairs over, and yelling an 8-letter barnyard epithet, which
was my joke today.
Right?
It's in your column. It's in your latest VIP column about the type of coverage that the New York Times has these days. Now, let me ask you this, Andrew. When you're covering the Chicago 7 trial, if Abby Hoffman had jumped up on top, I don't know if it was Abby Hoffman or not that did this, but if Abby Hoffman had jumped up on top of the table and yelled vulva, would the New York Times have reported it at that time?
Well, at that time, probably not. But at this time, yeah. They even in the old days, back then, I remember they had a women's health column, and they had very graphic advice about how women should clean their privates after going to the bathroom. And I thought, wow, well, I mean, if you're going to do it, why don't you do it so they understand? But in the Vietnam War, and I think this is a form of censorship. It was done to be prudish, but they excised all kinds of graphic stuff. So the coverage that these timid Northeasterners read at breakfast in the newspaper was sanitized. So it wasn't a very bloody war. A lot of bodies. Yeah, but there weren't a lot of blood. I even wrote about interviewing a little refugee girl squatting on the side of the road, and there's a long story to it. But at the end, I said, "So, are you afraid?" And she said, "No." And then she vomited in the dirt. and they took out the vomiting. So the ending was, "Are you afraid?" And she said, "No."
Yeah, you missed. I mean, it really misses the point of that anecdote.
Yeah, the point is she's scared to death.
Right.
And those kinds of details, they're graphic, but they're real, you know?
Well, and I'm not even sure it's that graphic. I mean, if you had described what came
but
up,
she was vomiting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it just a note that she vomited. I mean, that's not
so
graphic.
you know, I mean, given the old times and the new times, I prefer the old one. So I don't mean to overly criticize it, but I once spent 2 hours. I wasted 2 hours of my life on a weekday afternoon in Chicago, trying to find out if a woman in this story was married or not. So on second reference, I could say Miss or Mrs.
Yeah, now they just say Ms. in all instances.
Yeah. Well, I mean that makes sense. Or don't do it. I mean, now they even say Mr. for convicts. In those days, guy was convicted. No, he's no longer a Mr. So, you know, we kind of make fun of it later, but I'm not sure it was bad. You know, I mean, everything is more coarse these days. Everything.
Well, that brings us to the subject of your column here, which is if you have a vulva, the New York Times has some stimulating tips for you. And there's a number of things that we can talk about in this, which is, on the first place, they don't talk about women. They talk about people with vulvas.
I know. They never use the word women. This is an article that was a review of the and listing the top 5 clitoral stimulators. And what the advantages of each one was, and size and power and speed and cleanability and all that kind of stuff. So, but you think, well, probably women would be the majority of customers, but they never use the word women or woman in the piece. It's always people with vulvas.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of this whole woke nonsense thing. It's, you know, has to do with, you know, transgenders. And I mean, it's just a nonsense way to approach something like this. Put aside the fact that the New York Times is actually providing this type of, you know, product review or product class review is really what it is. They're talking about a whole class of products that normally you would, I mean, there's places where you can go to find that type of information. Normally you wouldn't think it was the New York Times. Right?
It's in the New York Times.
I mean, there's, you go to Cosmopolitan, go to Ms., you know,
right.
You know, go to,
or what was the one they used? Love Honey, lovehoney.com. Oh, come on.
Do that too. Maybe Consumer Reports. I don't know. I
don't know. Well, that's exactly what it was. Consumer Reports, except it was about the very intimate act of masturbation, and they had 11. They had a panel of 11 volunteer vulvas who tested these products. Tested these products and took notes. And
look, I mean, I think that there's a place for this type of
course there is.
There is definitely a place for it. I mean, the New York Times is not the place that I would, if I was in the market for such a product, the last place I'd look for this type of analysis would be in the New York Times. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And I'm not criticizing them. I'm just remarking on it because it shows change. And that's what news is change.
It does show change. And I mean, I think you can make a positive argument for it. I think you can make a negative argument for it. I'm not sure, just from a trust perspective, although it is called the Gray Lady, I don't.
That's right. That's right.
I don't know that I would necessarily see that as the most reliable source, but okay. But
no, they had volunteers, Ed.
Well, they did have volunteers. I don't even want to go into how that was. So you're right about this. You're right about this very colorful.
You know, reminds me. Excuse me. Years ago, back during this prudish era, I got the idea to Sesame Street was turning 5 years old. And I got the idea to do one of our national roundups and get people to go to different schools and talk with teachers if they noticed any change from the first class of preschoolers who had Sesame Street for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And they did. And one of the most vivid examples I remember was these teachers thought in kindergarten, or a lot of them did, that they were going to be teaching the alphabet. And so one of them went to the blackboard and wrote the big letter V. And the class in chorus yelled, "Venus, victory, vulture." just like the song on Sesame Street. So they had to adjust the curriculum. That's for sure.
Well, yeah. Look, I mean, again, it's certainly a worthy piece of journalism. Again, it just depends on, time and place, and maybe the Times readership has shifted into that type of thing. I just find it odd,
Yeah. Well,
but,
it is odd, and that's why I wanted to write about it. And hopefully there will be some people who read about it at redstate.com, or they could go to the author's page, Andrew Malcolm, and click on the newest story.
Absolutely. I want to talk to you a little bit about I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of other things too, as long as we're as long as we're here. I just got back from vacation, so
yeah, we noticed that the whole everything was stalled for 2 weeks here. You've been gold bricking.
Well, good.
We got nothing done, and in fact, because you were gone, Joe Biden went away again.
Did he?
Yeah, he only took 10 days. He was worried that he'd miss your coming back, so he came back day before you. But yeah, it's vacation time. If this was France, nothing would be going on.
Nothing would be going on. Yeah, and John's gone this week. Jazz is going to take some time off this month as well. So
I don't remember approving that, but okay.
He didn't run that by you? I thought he did. Okay, well,
no
worries. At any rate, I kept up with most of the stuff here. I was surprised though when I read NBC News this morning. I don't know if you had a chance to see this or not. NBC News, and Jonathan Allen's a good reporter. I like Jonathan Allen. I've talked to him a few times. He's pretty good guy, but he and I forget who his co-reporter was on this, decided that the big issue for Joe Biden right now is that Republicans are trying to damage his brand as a squeaky clean, family-oriented politician. It's like, so the big story here is that Republicans are pouncing again.
That's right. Exactly right. Republicans are pouncing on this squeaky clean father who tells lies about it.
Going after his strength.
Yeah, who steals valor. He told one of those Gold Star family moms that his son came home in a flag-draped coffin from Iraq, which of course he died in a special hospital suite in Houston with brain cancer, nothing to do with Iraq. So yeah, you wonder when you see Hunter Biden, and I mean you go down the list of nefarious things that he's done. Boy, you have to wonder about the parents. I have to say that.
Well, I want to read just a very brief excerpt from this. So he's never lost to a general election opponent in a political career that's taken him from Delaware's Newcastle County Council to the Oval Office. But the burnish on Biden's brand is being tested like never before, ahead of a close 2024 election. Now, if it's being tested like never before, whose fault is that? Because these allegations go back years.
Yes. Since what, 72? He's been in federal office.
Well, I mean, even back in 2017 and 2018, there were rumors that Hunter Biden's role on the Burisma board was something significantly different than what than what it was supposed to be at face value.
And Obama let it go.
And this was, I mean, this came up during the first impeachment. This was why the first impeachment came up, was because Donald Trump was foolish enough to directly try to, you know, you know, pressure Volodymyr Zelensky into digging up dirt on Hunter Biden, and Democrats in Congress reacted by impeaching him for it. So, I mean, these rumors have been swirling around for years. And the only reason why the Biden brand is being tested like never before is because the media has been trying to cover for him. And it's not working like never before.
That's like never before. Yeah. No, it's not. And you raised this issue some weeks ago, I think, in which you suggested that maybe this was the media's way of joining with the Democrat Party's elite to force Biden out, since he didn't seem to have a health issue that they could get rid of him on. That he would not. You said, I remember this, Ed. Let me check my notes here. Joe Biden will not be the Democrat nominee in 2024. And I wondered about it, but I come to agree with what I think you said. Maybe you didn't. But anyway, it fits with a potential scenario of how do we get rid of this guy and send him off to a graceful retirement, and hopefully he doesn't fall down on the beach.
Yeah, I think that Kamala Harris is the sticking point there. You can't get Kamala Harris, and they're certainly not going to put her at the top of the ticket. She's a disaster.
That's I don't want to credit Joe Biden with being clever in any way, but whoever decided on Kamala Harris, that was the insurance policy against Joe Biden's impeachment.
Yes. I'm almost tempted to go off on a Kamala-esque explanation of insurance, but I think I'll pass. Insurance is when you insure something so that it's insured. Oh, I did it anyway. There you go.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, we are closed because we are closed. I've seen a couple of women on I don't know what it is, Instagram, I guess, that parody her, and they they do it very well with the voice and the hand gestures. I always loved Rich Little's impersonations. I saw him a couple of times in person, and he was just wonderful. He could turn it on just like that.
Anybody. Oh yeah, he was brilliant.
And when he did Johnny Carson reaching for his tie and tapping the pencil.
Is he still around? Is Rich Little still around?
I think so.
He is. It's funny you mention that, because I think he's the one who did the Johnny Carson voice for the movie Driven about 5 or 6 years ago. It's a story about John DeLorean, and there's a scene where Johnny Carson calls him up in the middle of a party, and they unfortunately put the call on speakerphone, and Carson's calling to read him out about what a crap piece of car his DeLorean is. And at first they think he's kidding. It turns out that he's really angry. And in the movie, at least, I don't know if this really took place. Yeah, but it sounds very much like Johnny. It really sounds like Johnny Carson's voice. And of course, by the time the movie was made, he was dead. So I knew it wasn't Johnny who was playing it.
Yeah. I suspect they wouldn't, and they wouldn't pay him residuals. So he said he wouldn't. He said he wouldn't do it, even though he was dead.
That's right. Yeah, gotta get the residuals in, man. So yeah, I guess I was a little disappointed to find out that the big story from the mainstream media is still Republicans pouncing.
Pouncing, isn't that amazing? That's an excellent. I missed the pounce. I mean, I saw the story. It's like, oh, please again. But I should have thought of pouncing right away. You and I have a pouncing thing.
We do. We have a pouncing mentality because we've been around this long enough to recognize it when it comes up.
It's a good word, pounce. I like pounce. Yeah. I had a game with not another writer but with a friend in Montana when I was on the editorial board of the LA Times, and he would send me every month a word challenging me to get it into an editorial. And I did, every one of them. The hardest one was mollycoddle, but I got that in.
There you go. There is I don't know if you ever seen this. I love this movie, even though it's really silly and it's, completely dumb comedy. But there's a movie called Super Troopers. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's about 20 years old.
I don't think so.
It's a broad comic farce about, highway patrol officers in Vermont. And it's hilarious. If you ever get a chance to watch it, I think you enjoy it. Just dumb, stupid, fun humor, right? And one of the things that they do is supposedly they play games when they come up to people that they pulled over, and one is the meow game. And the one guy challenges his partner to say, says, well, so and so got 6 meows in. I think you can do 10. And Jim Gaffigan plays the guy that they pull over, right? And he says, all right, meow, let me see your driver's license there. And he keeps throwing in these meows where it's supposed to be nows. And Gaffigan starts giggling. He says, what's so funny, boy? Why are you laughing at me, meow? He says, are you saying meow? He says, why would I say meow? And the whole time his partner's holding up the count over the top of the car and laughing. You can see him laughing in the background.
10. Oh, that's hilarious.
He gets to 9, and the partner says he's gotten a 9 when he's ready to walk away. So he just goes back and goes, meow, to get to 10.
I saw there's some videos on Instagram that show pullovers, and some of them are hilarious. One of them it's kind of sad, was a cop that pulled over a car for speeding, and he walks up to the window and he looks through the driver's window and he goes, oh, wow. Would you and your lady friend please get out of the car? And the woman in the car with the young guy who was speeding was his wife. Yeah. And she wanted. He told the kid, you better be on your way. And he told his wife, well, you find your own way home. There's another one which is really hilarious, where the police pull him over and they tell him that he's traveling in a car with an unsecured infant, and he says no. His wife is sitting there. Says, no, we don't have any children. And the wife is holding up a pregnancy test that's positive. So he finally discovers it. And the other one, which I think is the best, is it's a woman. She has the camera on her dashboard, and the cop walks up to the window and he says, good afternoon, ma'am. May I see your license and registration? And the woman says, Dad, you can't keep doing this every time you see my car. I love those dad jokes.
Yeah, the dad jokes are great. Jokes are great. Yeah. So getting back to the news, all the news that was fit to miss, apparently, while I was on vacation.
The world was paralyzed.
I think it may have been. This week, and I bring this up because you spent a lot of time in Asia as a reporter, in Japan specifically. This week, you've got both of the anniversaries of the atomic bombings in Japan, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Nagasaki's tomorrow. I think Hiroshima was on, I want to say it was on Thursday or Friday last week. And there's already, the movie Oppenheimer is sort of added fuel to the normal annual issue of, well, the U.S. didn't have to drop the bomb and all that kind of thing. I'm curious as to how you see that debate at the moment, and how serious people are about this, because I'm going to write about it a little bit later on. By the time this comes up, my post will have already been up for a while. But I mean, there's ample evidence that Japan was not going to surrender.
No, of course not. They weren't. My office assistant, who was a wonderful elderly man in the Tokyo bureau, he worked there, and then when the war came, he hid the New York Times files in his backyard. He buried them. And then a reporter showed up after the surrender. And of course, they were in military uniform, even reporters in those days. And the occupation was beginning. His colleagues told the man, you better run and hide. There's an American soldier here. But he didn't. And it was a New York Times guy. And he went back to work for the New York Times like it never happened. He told me that as late as the last few weeks of the war, they were still training civilians how to roll under a tank with a grenade. Now, I don't know that a grenade would have affected a Sherman tank, but how they could, from basement windows, they put a grenade in the tracks of a passing tank and so on. So I agree with you. They were going to leave. Even when the emperor gave his speech, he never used the word surrender. That would be the end of him and the end of the world. He said we must face the unfaceable.
Yes.
And the Japanese are very obtuse on those things. And like if somebody offers you a salad, you say, "Oh, no, thanks." That's a rejection. You never say no. Don't say no. They offer you something you don't want. You say that's not necessary. Everything is oblique to avoid any kind of friction, unless you're invading a country, and in which case anything goes. I was in a meeting with the New York Times publisher, who's now gone, deceased, and the Prime Minister Fukuda of Japan, who during the Second World War, before the Second World War, was the finance administrator during the rape of Nanking. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I wasn't alive, but no, I certainly know that.
Yeah, right. So he's sitting there, and this will just show you they don't have nerves, and I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that this is a fact. They don't have nerves or sensitivities like other nationalities. So he's sitting there talking to the Jewish publisher of the New York Times, reminiscing about the great days of Nanking. Now, you might not want to do that if you were sensitive to these things. So they're sensitive about things to our tastes don't matter. Like if you hand somebody your business card, it's rude to put it on the desk. You hand it to them, and with their hand, they take it from your hand.
Yeah.
Somebody gives you a gift, the worst thing you can do is open it right away. Okay? Yep. Because you're checking to see if it's any good. I found it fascinating. Some Westerners find it intimidating, but it explains the word disorient. It's because so many things are backwards by our standards. Of course, we're backwards by theirs. So anyway, It was fascinating. Well, yeah, it was fascinating, and I don't feel any guilt about the Second World War, and I haven't. It was brutal, and it would have gone on a lot longer, and many more people would have died if we hadn't used the bomb. Then, you notice they waited, 5 or 6 days after Hiroshima to see if they were going to surrender?
After Nagasaki, it was almost a week after Nagasaki before they actually communicated that they were going to surrender. Yeah.
Right, but they dropped Hiroshima first, and then they waited, thinking,
we waited. Yes.
So we waited and say, well, this will obviously wrap it up, but it didn't. And that tells you what the mentality was in the leadership of Japan. So they dropped the next one. The next one didn't work so well. It was a different model, and they in Nagasaki. I forgot what the Nagasaki wasn't the primary target that day. Some other place was. So it was fogged in or something. So they went to Nagasaki, and Nagasaki's in a valley, so the damage went up, not out, like it did in Hiroshima. And And so that finally convinced them. But it was the emperor who said we must accept the unacceptable. Of course, Japanese knew exactly what that meant.
Well, yeah. Now, so one of the books that I read, and I talked to Larry a little bit about it today or yesterday. Well, today, but yesterday, as these things are going to get published, is a book, Downfall: The End of the Imperial Japanese Empire by Richard B. Frank. It's one of the books I read on vacation. Really interesting book. He was one of the first, maybe the first person who got access to the classified files from both Japan and the United States, as well as I think about all of the communications, right? And this is I bring it up because this week we're going to get a whole raft of this revisionist type of thing, and it irritates me every time it comes up. That Japan was ready to surrender. All we needed to do was guarantee that the emperor was going to stay in place, and they would have gone through with unconditional surrender. Otherwise, it's absolutely not true. They have actual diplomat, and this is 1999 when this was written, right? So this is 24 years ago when this guy produced all this information, saying that he had diplomatic cables that were going back and forth between Tokyo and their guy in Moscow. This guy named Sato. He was the ambassador because at the time the Soviet Union hadn't declared war on Japan. They had been neutral, right? And so they had a diplomatic.
Yeah, they wanted to get in on the goods at the end. Yeah.
Well, yes, and Japan was trying to keep the Soviet Union from entering the war, not because they thought that they were going to invade the home islands, but because they knew that they were going to go through Manchuria. At the time, they called it Manchu Kuo. And they had a bunch of, they had some very large army groups stationed there that they were trying to preserve. So Sato's over there, and Tokyo's telling him, "Oh, go say, we're going to send Prince Konoe, I think it was, and we're going to send him over with an offer that for the Soviets to mediate a truce between Japan and the United States and the UK." And, we're going to say that, the Potsdam Declaration had already come out, in which Americans broadly hinted that Japan could choose whatever form of government that they wanted, as long as the Japanese people chose it, which meant, they could keep their emperor if they wanted to keep their emperor. And they made it very clear that they weren't interested in the Potsdam Declaration. The only thing that Japan would do is stop the war in place. No troops on the home island, no foreign troops on the home island, and that all of the places that they had occupied would only be released if Americans and the British made them independent, right? So that Japan could swallow them up later. And I mean, and Sato is sending telegrams back saying, "You guys are out of your minds. You have no idea." Reality, actually, I mean, he does, obviously, as you said, they're very mannered. Manners mean a lot. But if you read this, he's kind of pushing past the point of manners, saying, "You guys don't understand. You have no idea what reality is."
Yeah.
This is not a serious proposal, and it's not going to be accepted as a serious proposal.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. Stalin basically laughed it off. Get it.
Yeah, well, then they got some islands out of it, the Sakhalin, right? And there's a lot of oil lot of oil there.
They're still disputing that, right? I mean, there still is a dispute.
Well,
Japan over that. But yeah, it was these guys were delusional to the very end. And even with Hirohito, he had to overcome a revolt. In the Imperial Army that went all the way up to at least it seems to have gone all the way up to the General War Council, the Big Six, right? And he was able to face it down. But the other thing that this book makes pretty clear is that the story that Hirohito was merely a religious figurehead and that the army was making all the decisions is somewhat of a fable. I wouldn't call it a myth, but it's somewhat of a fable. And it was a fable that was very useful to both Japan and the United States after the surrender, because the United States was able to pretend that Hirohito didn't have anything to do with the war, so it's okay to leave him in place for good reasons, because it helped smooth the occupation, made it a lot easier to have an occupation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean,
every emperor picks a name for his ruling era. And that name, can you imagine being a kid? That name becomes the calendar. So when Hiroshito came in, I think it was 1925 or something, he called his reign Showa, which ironically means peace. And of course, a few years later, they started taking over Asia and China and Manchuria. But from that point forward, people give the years. So in other words, if you were born, let's say he came in 1925. If you were born in 1928, your birth year is Showa 3.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Yeah. If you were born in 1914, you're screwed. you have to change the dates on your birthday. So whenever I would ask somebody for my interviews with an interpreter, and I would say, how old are they? So they would negotiate, well, okay, so it's Showa that and that, so that equals 1962 in the Western calendar. When I was there, was in the mid 70s, the emperor, it was the old guy. The emperor went on a trip somewhere. I forgot, some Japanese city. And the motorcycle escort, they had a detailed plan. And the motorcycle escort took the emperor's car around the block to the front of the house. But he took it a different way than the map said. So, of course, what do you think he did, Ed? He killed himself that night.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, because he'd taken the emperor around the wrong side of the block. It's same place, got out of the car, everything is fine, but he went a different way. I found it fascinating. Some Westerners find it intimidating and confounding, but I enjoyed my time. I found it absolutely fascinating. And with Japanese who understand the West, there's a phrase for that. Those are the people like diplomats' kids who grow up in the U.S. or England and then they go back to Japan. They understand the West. They speak English. And there's a Japanese phrase called batakusai, which means they stink like butter. Because Westerners drink the yucky dairy products.
Well,
isn't that something? But the one thing that I'll never forgive Japan for is I took my family on a Sunday train trip. We went on the bullet train. We got off and walked around whatever city it was. And I treated my family to ice cream bars, like Eskimo pies.
Sure.
Yeah. And I bit into the pie and there was chocolate covering and then vanilla ice cream and then a big tumor of bean curd.
Ew.
Beans. Now, I've never liked beans. I never will like beans. And if anybody asks me, what should the world be rid of? The plague, malaria, whatever, I say beans. And we need to get rid of all kinds of beans. They're just disgusting. But can you imagine? I bite in and I get a mouthful of bean curd. So that's the one thing I will never forgive Japan for. But it only happened once. And look, Ed, I survived just fine. I found they eat a lot of interesting things there, and I found if I didn't ask what it was, 80% of the time I enjoyed it. As somebody said, this is eel from a rice field. You might go, but it was really good. I like that stuff. Oh, one quick story, one more. I took my family to a Japanese inn in I forget where, but it was a couple hour plane flight from Tokyo. It was right by an active volcano. So we're at this Japanese inn, and they're very honored to have this strange Western family in their house. And they had we had yellow hair or red hair. That was really freaky for them. So the lady cooked dinner, made a special dinner, and she brought us in. One of the servings was a giant sea slug.
Ooh.
This is, a sea slug is,
Yeah.
it's a snail from the ocean, the size of your fist.
Yeah.
And she put that, this is very proud. I guess it was a delicacy. She put it down in front of everybody, and my kids were like, oh my God. And she said, well, enjoy. And she went away. And I said, no, I'm not eating it either. So I took each one of them, wrapped them in toilet paper, and I flushed all 4 sea slugs down the toilet. Fortunately, it didn't jam. And she came back. She said, oh, you finished. You want some more? No. And in Japan, you don't say no. So we said, oh, that's not necessary.
That's not necessary. Yeah.
That's not. We wouldn't want to put you through all that. Anyway, it's a wonderful 3 years of our life, and taught me a lot.
Well, I appreciate the insight, and I knew you were the right man to ask, because you are not just the Prince of Twitter. You're not just the regent of redstate.com. You're a very experienced journalist with lots of years in that culture. And I do appreciate the insight, but we're almost to the end of our podcast.
Yeah, we are.
A couple of jokes, man. I got a couple of jokes for you.
Okay, well, you start.
All right. Well, give me a second. I'm going to get these from Reader's Digest today. All right. So I've got a couple of these things here. Helvetica and Times New Roman walk into a bar. The bartender says, get out of here. We don't serve your type. Yeah. Wah, 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 wah.
If people aren't in the news business, they don't know that that's a font, but okay.
Oh, yeah. We know it's a font.
Well, I know. We enjoyed it. The hell with the rest of these people.
All right. Well, here's another one. Did you hear about the mathematician who's afraid of negative numbers? He'll stop at nothing to avoid them.
Boom. Okay, so mine, David Letterman, these are all old, of course. He said, Olympic athletes are getting off the bus at the Olympic Village, and the people are handing out 150,000 free condoms. I'm thinking we might be televising the wrong events.
Yeah, I agree.
Jay Leno said, Joe Biden reveals that he had to ask his wife Jill to marry him 5 times. 5 times. That's not a proposal. That's harassment. And did you see her ex revealing what the couple did to him after she left him? Well, anyway, let's see. CBS, Jimmy Fallon says, CBS is launching its own membership program that comes with free home delivery. They'll deliver within a 10-mile radius, or roughly the length of one CVS receipt.
Yeah, it's pretty close,
Yeah.
I agree. All right. Well, those are the jokes of the week, folks. We'll be back next week with more, because we'll be back with the Prince of Twitter, the regent of redstate.com, Andrew Malcolm. Thanks so much, sir. We will talk to you next week.
I will. I'll be here. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ed.